Imagine stepping into a world frozen in time. A forbidden expanse, cloaked in mystery and radiation, where the fragments of a catastrophic past whisper stories of a disaster that changed the course of history. Welcome to our illegal journey into the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, the site of the worst nuclear disaster in history. Braving sub-zero temperatures and a treacherous environment, we embark on a 40-kilometre trek through a wintry, abandoned landscape where time seems to stand still. Faced with the dual threats of radiation exposure and the legal consequences of trespassing into one of the most hauntingly beautiful wastelands on Earth. Hello, I'm Nick, and I'd like to share with you the journey I took into the heart of the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. Before I delve into my adventure, it's important to acknowledge that this trip and the footage predates the tragic escalation in conflict marked by the wider Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. A war that continues to affect countless lives and sadly seemingly has no end in sight. May we all hope for a future of peace and healing for Ukraine. I hope you enjoy my story. My first visit to Ukraine back in 2015 coincided with the sombre anniversary of the Kyiv revolution. The city's air was heavy, with the collective heartache of a nation mourning the lives lost amidst the upheaval. Amid this backdrop of reflection and sorrow, I embarked on my first journey into the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. It was a guided incursion, constrained to the narrative and paths well trod by countless others before me. Our path skirted the infamous Reactor 4, shadowed by a yet incomplete containment field designed to encase the crumbling sarcophagus. A brief pass through Pripyat offered a glimpse into a ghost town paused in time. Yet it barely scratched the surface of what the exclusion zone had to offer. That visit, though insightful, left a yearning within me, an itch for an unfiltered journey within the area. Late in 2018, driven by this unfulfilled quest, I returned to Ukraine, this time with my friend Ben, ready to delve deeper into the mystery of the exclusion zone. We sought the authenticity of the Stalker, a term adopted to symbolise those who dare to navigate Chernobyl's landscape under the radar, seeking its unguarded truths. We arrived in Kyiv with a couple of days to spare, which we eagerly dedicated to soaking in the city's atmosphere. Our exploration took us through the mosaic of experiences Kyiv offers, from the quintessential tourist pursuits to the hidden corners that lie just off the beaten path. We quickly found ourselves veering off the conventional routes, climbing over barriers and wandering through the skeletal frames of the abandoned structures and bridges. These brief excursions into the decaying deserted spaces served as a poignant prelude to what lay ahead, setting the stage for a deeper journey into the heart of the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. The evening of our venture into Chernobyl arrived with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. We met our contact in the heart of Kyiv under the cloak of night. He briefed us on the upcoming journey and wished us luck for the days ahead. Next, we needed to taxi across the city to meet up with our stalker guide Kirill, who would be accompanying us for the next several days. We waited outside of an unassuming tower block on the edge of Kyiv for our ride out of the city towards the exclusion zone. After a few minutes, a grey sedan with a smashed windscreen pulled up. There was a brief exchange of words between Kirill and the driver. Given our extremely limited Ukrainian vocabulary, the best we could do was nod along as we were bundled into the back seat and whisked away out of the city. The urban landscape gradually gave way to desolate rural roads, with the city's fluorescent glow fading into the rearview mirror. Our drive, spanning a couple of hours, gave plenty of time to reflect on what exactly we'd gotten ourselves into. Pausing at a remote truck stop marked our symbolic point of no return. Stretching out our legs and warming up with coffee, we were acutely aware of the adventure that lay ahead. The next stop would be the edge of the exclusion zone. Our approach to the zone needed to be concealed. The vehicle navigated overgrown dirt tracks. The car scraping and bottoming out heightened the sense of unease. I remember thinking, you really don't want to be stranded here. Upon reaching the drop-off point, we quickly disembarked, shouldering our gear, and plunged into the wilderness. The need for stealth meant marching in single file, silently and without lights, limiting our ability to document this leg of the journey. The footage I have managed to film was with an infrared camera, which is why some of the footage has a peculiar purple tint, as this was the only way to film these sections undetected. We'd been dropped somewhere on the outskirts of a small village called Chernobyl. Our first major obstacle was the part-frozen River Uz, which we needed to cross. With the temperatures hovering around -5 degrees Celsius, we stripped down and braced ourselves for the crossing. Unfortunately, there was no way to film the river crossing. Kirill estimated the river's depth to be about thigh height. Making our way out across the ice, we could hear it crack beneath us. Halfway across, and the ice gave way, plunging us chest deep into the freezing cold river. I remember the shock of adrenaline, that sharp intake of air as I'm scrambling, holding my bag just above my head as I try and stumble to get to the riverbank the other side. When I finally reach the bank, I realise I haven't packed a towel. With no spare clothes that I could sacrifice, I had to make do drip drying and sipping the cheap brandy that we'd packed to try and keep the cold at bay. It wasn't the best of starts. With the river now behind us, we trekked through the overgrown landscape, the sense of urgency easing somewhat. Our hike led us to a remote, abandoned farm, which would serve as our first campsite. The eagerness of settling in before the cold intensified meant there was only a little time to pick through the trinkets that had been gathered at the farm by other passing visitors. With an early start awaiting us for the next leg of our journey, sleep was now our priority. Waking up after a surprisingly restful night, I thawed out my frozen boots and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The day ahead promised a trek through picturesque grasslands and forests, a stark contrast to the stereotypical image of a nuclear wasteland. Avoiding roads to minimise the risk of detection, our journey took us through dense forest areas. The presence of animal tracks was a constant reminder of the thriving wildlife that had reclaimed the land. The day's first real test came when we needed to cross a main road and an expanse of open ground. All around we could hear the not too distant hum of vehicles, a cue that we weren't alone and the first real danger of being spotted. Waiting for a lull in the traffic, we seized our moment. Now in the relative safety of the long grasses on the other side, we paused to catch our breath and explored an abandoned village, where I began to notice a recurring theme. Shoes scattered everywhere, a reminder of the lives hastily abandoned here. This small village, laying more than 15 kilometres away from the reactor site, is one of many that dotted the vast landscape inside of the exclusion zone. It underscores the scale of the cordoned off area, a sprawling no man's land that extended far beyond the immediate vicinity of the disaster site. This realisation brought into focus the extensive impact of the Chernobyl disaster, affecting not those just in the immediate surroundings, but also communities and ecosystems many miles away. We set our sights towards the forest area, which now approached on the horizon. Back hiking through the trees brought a sense of reassurance, a contrast to the open vulnerability of the section we just traversed. We soon reached the 10-kilometre boundary, marked by a downtrodden barbed wire fence. Not far beyond this was an old pig farm. Kirill explained that it once supplied meat to the nearby Duga radar station. Since the disaster, the farm had been adopted by Iron Men, groups often comprised of ex-convicts who would come into the area to scavenge scrap metal to sell. But now it was just a temporary haven for stalkers and our home for the night. With the day's light beginning to wane, we dropped our bags off and ventured to a nearby radar station. This site once formed part of a Krug antenna circle. Now all that remained were the remnants of the antennas, which had been chopped down and presumably picked over for scrap by the Iron Men, and a burnt-out husk of an operations building long abandoned by the army. Trekking in with minimal supplies meant that we had to rely on gathering water within the radioactive zone. In the main building, we discovered an exposed basement filled with rainwater. This would serve as our first water source. Drinking water, potentially containing radioactive particles, is a really bad idea. But given the situation, it was a risk we had to take. The stark reality of life inside of the exclusion zone for the next several days was beginning to set in. As night fell on our second day in the exclusion zone, Kirill decided to light a fire to dry his clothes, which were now frozen solid from the previous night's river crossing. Whilst the warmth was welcome, our Geiger counter revealed that the burning wood was emitting considerable radiation. Ben and I, opting for safety over comfort, kept our distance, preparing our meal for the night. Soviet-era ration packs, consisting of porridge oats combined with ambiguous chunks of dehydrated meat. Washing the meat porridge down, we polished off the remaining brandy whilst planning our route for the next day. We crammed in a tiny room in an attempt to preserve what heat we could. Outside, the howls of wolves echoed in the distance, interrupted only by the snoring inside. Sleep was a luxury that eluded us. Our early morning starts at 5 a.m. The first goal of the day was to reach the nearby Duga radar before dawn to avoid detection by guard stations nearby. Emerging from the woods, the sight that greeted us was nothing short of awe-inspiring. Standing next to the colossal structure of the Duga radar, we were dwarfed by its scale. The antenna array towers approximately 150 metres into the sky and stretches over 700 metres in length. We paused for a moment to check whether it's safe to climb, before making our way up the many flights of the imposing structure. The Duga radar is a significant relic of the Cold War era. Constructed as a response to the perceived threat from the United States and its allies, the radar was part of the Soviet Union's early warning radar network, designed to detect incoming intercontinental ballistic missiles. The Duga radar is famously known as the Russian woodpecker. This is due to the repetitive tapping noise it emitted, which disrupted radio communications worldwide. On the horizon, I caught my first glimpse of Reactor 4 in the distance. With time against us, by the time we reach the top of the radar, there's only time to snap some hasty photos before we have to immediately descend. This is because a critical task still awaited us: retrieving a food stash hidden in advance for us, which was perilously close to an active guard post. Only Kirill knew the precise location of the supplies, disappearing off into the base to collect them. All Ben and I could do was sit, wait, and hope for his return. Left with our thoughts, we couldn't help thinking, what if he gets caught? What if we get caught here without him, without someone that can try and explain what it is we're doing here? And if we're not caught, with barely any food, no signal, and a day's walk in either direction, what would we do? Fortunately, Kirill did return, and with the supply secured. We retreated back to the safety of the forest, following along the power lines. A brief stop allowed us one final look towards the Duga radar in the distance. We used the rest to split the load of the food stash between us and filter some water we gathered from the basement the night before, which had already begun to start freezing in the day's sub-zero temperatures. Our final objective for the day was to reach Pripyat, with the last stretch being several kilometers hiked along the main highway, which would require the cover of darkness to traverse. To bide our time, we took a detour towards an abandoned Soviet missile base, another reminder of the zone's layered history. We reached the missile base with hours to spare before nightfall. Kirill informed us that it had become a frequented spot by stalkers, and due to its remoteness, it was relatively safe to explore during daylight. There was no widely known or documented information about this facility that I could find online, or any other missile base located within the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. Given that the site was shrouded in mystery and devoid of any official records, it was the perfect spot to kill some time and speculate what the building remnants might have been used for during the Cold War tensions. One of the most striking finds was a mural painted in the bold, unmistakable style of Soviet propaganda. The artwork, though faded and peeling, still conveyed the powerful and optimistic imagery characteristic of the era, a stark contrast to the desolation that now surrounded us. In another part of the facility, we uncovered what appeared to be a scale model of the site. This model, though covered in dust and partially damaged, provided a fascinating glimpse into the design and possible purpose of the structure. While exploring, we made a crucial discovery that significantly improved our situation: a covered freshwater well. The water from the well, clear and seemingly uncontaminated, was a welcome relief, and a much needed improvement over our previous water source. With our bottles filled from the well, we felt a renewed sense of optimism. The eerie silence of the abandoned missile base was pierced by an unexpected and unsettling noise. What sounded like loud radio chatter, the sound growing closer, sent a ripple of alarm through us. In the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the unease, wondering, had we been tracked from the radar station? The possibility of being discovered by authorities in such a remote but exposed location prompted us to make an early exit. Our plan to traverse the highway still needed to be delayed until 9 PM, which was the curfew for scheduled visitors within the zone, minimising the risk of encountering traffic. As nightfall approached, Kirill guided us towards the highway, mentioning a suitable stop-off point we could use along the way. We sought temporary refuge in an old trolley bus, which had become a makeshift sanctuary for stalkers like us. The interior of the bus, though worn and weathered, was adorned with a tapestry of names, both old and recent, etched into the walls by those who'd passed through before us. As the daylight dwindled, we found ourselves captivated by the sight of the reactor lights in the distance. Waiting at the bus, we cooked up some noodles with cheese and meat, a welcome variation from the meal the night before. As we sat waiting at the trolley bus, the temperature plummeted. The cold from the river crossing 2 nights prior had never fully left us. To try and deal with the bitter cold, I remember repeatedly getting up and running laps around the bus, trying anything to try and keep warm, try and get the feeling back in my limbs. After 2 hours, we could take no more. We were faced with a tough decision: risk an early journey on the highway, taking our chances with traffic, or detour through the Red Forest. During the Chernobyl disaster, the Red Forest received the highest levels of radiation. The intense levels of radiation killed the pine trees, turning their needles bright red, which is how the area got its name. It became one of the most contaminated areas in the world. Even today, the radiation levels are significantly higher than the surrounding area. We chose to take our chances on the highway. After taping up anything that might reflect headlights, we made our way out to the highway. The transition from stumbling over uneven ground to walking on flat tarmac was a welcome change. However, the flat, open expanse of the highway presented its own set of challenges. Visibility was a double-edged sword. Whilst we could spot vehicles from a distance, it also meant we were equally visible to any passing traffic. The lack of cover for long stretches of the road made our journey even more precarious. As we moved forward, we had to constantly scan the horizon for approaching vehicles and be ready to react at a moment's notice. Each time a truck or car neared, we hastily sought cover, diving into the bushes that lined the road. Despite a couple of close encounters, we pressed on, driven by the goal of reaching our next landmark. Finally, the iconic Pripyat sign came into view. Its sight was a relief and a milestone, marking our arrival at the threshold of the abandoned city. We posed for some pictures, relieved that we'd made the journey undetected. However, this was abruptly cut short. A convoy of vehicles was emerging from the dark, their approach almost silent against the backdrop of the deserted highway. With no time to seek cover, our only option was to hit the deck where we stood. I found myself lying in grass directly beneath the sign, my backpack still on and barely concealed. As the sound of the vehicles grew louder, we held our breath, hoping somehow we would remain unnoticed. Miraculously, the convoy passed without stopping, seemingly oblivious to the two not-so-hidden lumps by the side of the road. With the sound of the trucks faded into the distance, we quickly gathered ourselves and continued our trek into the city. We kept our heads down and marched the rest of the way into Pripyat. Our first brief stop was at the old police station cells. It provided a moment to gather our thoughts and steady any lingering nerves. Unlike most structures in Pripyat, the police station continued to serve its original purpose until 1997. This extended use, long after the city had been evacuated, was driven by the necessity to protect what remained from any would-be looters. Despite the urge to immediately start exploring the city, there was a pressing task that we needed to address. We needed to stock up on water for our days ahead in the city, and this needed to be done discreetly. Daytime would bring organised tours and visitors into the area. It would make it impossible to do so during daylight without being spotted. With our options limited, Kirill reluctantly led us to an open manhole cover that revealed what looked like an underground sewer running beneath the street. Descending the small ladder, we were met with a depressing sight. Stagnant smelling water of a grim brown colour. Reluctantly we collected the lumpy water, all the while hoping we might find a better source later. After securing our water supply, we ditched our bags in one of the apartment blocks and headed off to explore. Despite being awake for nearly 24 hours, the excitement of finally being in this haunting city overruled any fatigue. Ben and I left Kirill behind to rest, as we ventured out to explore the desolate streets and buildings under the cover of darkness. Named after the nearby river, Pripyat the city was founded on the 4th of February 1970. It was designed as a model city, a symbol of progress and to showcase the success and comfort of Soviet life. At the time of the Chernobyl disaster, the city was home to about 49,000 people, many of whom were young families. On the 27th of April, in the aftermath of the disaster, the entire population was evacuated in just a few hours, under the impression that it would be a temporary measure. However, the residents never returned, leaving Pripyat a ghost town. Wandering through the abandoned city, we found ourselves among the relics of a once thriving community, now silent. There were many highlights of this first evening in the city, but I think my favourite was climbing one of the tower blocks, crowned with a decorative Soviet star. From the top, the view was both breathtaking and haunting. We could see the entire expanse of the city, the shadowy outlines of its abandoned structures, and in the distance, the twinkling lights of Reactor 4. It was a surreal experience, standing atop this remnant of a forgotten era, looking out as the only residents of a city that time had left behind. The next day dawned and we were feeling well rested, rejuvenated by the relative luxury of our abandoned apartment. We'd picked to camp out in one of the tower blocks on the city limits. Outside, we could hear the arrival of minibuses, signalling the start of legal tour exclusions into the zone, bringing with them a need for us to remain inconspicuous. After doing our best to warm up drinking coffee, we began our day's exploration. To start with, we explored the remnants of our tower block. Although most of the apartments had been gutted and were little more than a collection of debris-strewn rooms and empty corridors, there remained a number of scattered belongings and the occasional piece of furniture which served as poignant reminders of life before the disaster. We gradually made our way up to the snow-covered rooftop. The vantage point offered a breathtaking perspective of the sprawling cityscape. From this height, Pripyat unfolded in all its grandeur, its massive scale becoming truly apparent in the clear light of day. The height not only provided us with stunning views, but also a strategic advantage, allowing us to remain hidden from the tour groups and their guides meandering through the streets. With every glance over the edge, we balanced our curiosity with the necessity of discretion, keenly aware we needed to remain unseen. As the day unfolded, our growing confidence in remaining undetected emboldened us to venture down to ground level and explore the open streets. By now it was late afternoon. The number of visitors within the city had dwindled to only a handful. Our footsteps crunched through the snow, the sound echoing across the uninhibited avenues. With each turn we encountered vivid reminders of the remnants of the city's past life. Deserted playgrounds, overgrown and succumbing to rust and weather. Fruit trees, branches heavy with unpicked fruit, their bounty left to slowly spoil in the ghostly quiet. We passed countless homes and apartments, their doors left ajar, in anticipation of their occupants' return. Inside, more remnants of interrupted lives laid scattered, classrooms frozen in time, toys and personal belongings once treasured, now abandoned amidst the hasty evacuation. As night began to fall, the last of the tour buses made their departure, their presence receding beyond the boundaries of the exclusion zone. Pripyat left to its silence and shadows, and we were alone once again. We stumbled upon an unassuming outbuilding that upon closer inspection revealed a trove of historical treasures. Hidden within were hundreds of plans encompassing various sites across the entire Chernobyl region. Among these documents we discovered detailed blueprints and maps, each providing a unique insight into the area's past life and infrastructural ambitions. Next, we headed to the massive Jupiter factory site on the outskirts of town, a once thriving complex that now stood as a mere skeleton of its former self. Official records designate the factory as a manufacturer of tape recorders and other components for household appliances. Yet there's much speculation and rumour that this was a mere smokescreen, and that the factory was instead secretly producing semiconductor components for the Soviet military. In the aftermath of the disaster, parts of the factory played a critical role in the Chernobyl response effort, with the factory being used for the production of robots designed for clearing radioactive debris and other radiological experiments. Researching the factory, it's also claimed that aspects of the original sarcophagus that encases Reactor 4 were designed here. By 2002, the factory was completely abandoned, leaving behind a complex shrouded in mystery and speculation. The juxtaposition of its official history and the rumours of its secret military involvement painted a picture of a facility caught between two worlds, the civilian and the covert. Next, we made our way to the northern side of the city, where a converted kindergarten stood. In the aftermath of the disaster, this once cheerful place had been converted into a laboratory known as RADEC. Inside of the RADEC lab, we were met with a fascinating sight. Thousands of containers littered the shelves and floor, each holding soil samples collected from various locations across the exclusion zone. We spent a good hour in the lab, methodically scanning the shelves with the Geiger counter, with the goal of finding the most contaminated samples. These samples represented a concerted effort in the years following the disaster to research and analyse the spread of radioactive materials, in the hope of containing and understanding the environmental impact. Following this, we shifted our focus eastward. Heading towards the medical district, en route we took a slight detour to visit the music school, a building that instantly captures attention with its distinctive mosaic entrance. Upon entering, we found ourselves in a spacious auditorium. At the heart of the room stood a grand piano, a solitary figure on a stage, its elegance marred by decay. Stepping into the hospital, our Geiger counter immediately signals a sharp increase in radiation levels, surpassing anything we'd previously recorded at the Radec lab. The hospital provided care for both residents of Pripyat and the workers of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. It played a critical role in the unfolding crisis of the disaster. In the chaotic hours that followed the reactor's explosion, the hospital became the first point of refuge for the afflicted firefighters and plant workers, bearing the invisible lethal scars of acute radiation exposure. Unbeknownst to the hospital staff, the severity of the contamination and the dire consequences of direct exposure were not immediately realised, leading to secondary contamination within the walls of the hospital itself. The hospital, with its haunting legacy, served as a grim reminder of the disaster's immediate human toll and the enduring scars left on the survivors and the environment. A false sense of security had lured us into complacency. The careful vigilance we'd maintained throughout the day unfortunately slipped away in our overconfidence. This illusion of security was abruptly shattered when a torch beam suddenly focused on us. We weren't alone, and a guard had just spotted us. In the panic, there was no chance to try and document this. I just remember us scattering in different directions. We eventually managed to make our way towards a tower block and sprinted to the top of it. Sat at the top in silence with all the lights off, we could hear the guards search below. We could hear radio chatter and the torch beam frantically scanning back and forth in our general direction. It was almost an hour before we felt confident the guard had finally given up and retreated back to his hut. We collectively agreed no more exploring for the night as we carefully made our way back to the apartment. The next morning we awoke with the events of the previous night still fresh in our minds. We didn't want to push our luck any further and risk arrest, and we didn't want to lose any of the photos or footage we'd managed to document. Understanding the need for a discreet departure, Kirill called his contact, a worker within the exclusion zone, who agreed to pick us up near the Yanvi train station at the edge of the city. As we packed our belongings and left the city behind, our emotions were a tangle of relief and regret for what remained unexplored. Navigating our way through the encroaching wilderness, we followed the path to the train tracks. A condition of our ride out was an agreement to maintain a strict no-camera policy during our departure. This was a small price to pay for the assistance of someone willing to risk their position to help us exit the zone discreetly. Given the alternative of a 2-day trek, we happily agreed. The driver dropped us about a kilometre away from the exclusion zone's boundary, marking the beginning of the final leg of our journey, back where it all began. Hunkered down in the forest beside the road, we anxiously awaited our ride. The moment we received the signal that our car was ready, we dashed towards it, eager to avoid the police presence. We tossed our bags in the boot and dived in the back seat. As we sped away from the zone, we passed a checkpoint, bustling with tourists, embarking on their sanctioned exploration. A wave of relief washed over me. We'd made it. Reflecting on our journey through the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, it stands out as a trip unlike any other. Mentally and physically demanding, but immensely rewarding. I'll never forget the sights and experiences of those few days, and for that I'm immensely grateful. I'd just love to go back. I wanted to thank our contacts in Ukraine, Vlad and Kirill. Without their guidance and expertise, this trip would not have been possible. I also wanted to thank Ben, who came along with me. I've linked below his excellent write-up of our adventure. And finally, thank you for watching.